She knows who he is now. Every song she defended, every midnight she spent crying over a voice she could not name, it was him. The man who argued with her about salon chairs. The man who listened to her talk about his own music like he was hearing himself for the first time. And now the wall between them is gone, and what is left is more complicated and more real than anything either of them planned for. But the world Min-jae belongs to does not care about what is real. Taerim is moving. Do-hwan has nothing left to lose. And someone who was supposed to be protected is now standing directly in the path of everything Min-jae has spent 4 years trying to keep away from the people he loves. The song has been found. But can the man who sang it survive being known? Subscribe, like, and stay until the very end. This is the song he buried, part 2. And it ends here. The first thing Taerim did when he heard the release was nothing. That was the thing about Jang Taerim that people who underestimated him always missed. He did not react. He did not call immediately, did not fire off messages, did not convene emergency meetings in the cold Seoul office with the city glittering indifferently behind him. He sat in his chair in the dark for approximately 40 minutes, and he thought, and when he was finished thinking, he picked up his phone and made one call that was not to Min-jae. The call was to a man named Cha Sung-won, who handled certain logistical problems for the organization in situations where the problem was not external but internal. Taerim spoke for less than 3 minutes. Then he ended the call and went to bed. In Nairobi, Min-jae did not know about this call yet. What he knew on the morning after the release was that the streaming numbers were extraordinary and climbing. That G-Take had sent him a voice message at 4 a.m. Seoul time that was mostly unintelligible through what sounded like genuine emotion from a man who did not do genuine emotion. And that Sukjun had placed the phone face down on the car roof and had not answered Taerim's 17 messages, which was its own kind of statement. He also knew that Zawadi had not contacted him. He had not expected her to. He understood that what he had dropped into her life the previous night was not something that resolved overnight. He understood that knowing who he was changed the landscape of every conversation they had ever had, and that she was a woman who needed to walk through her own understanding of things before she was ready to speak. He respected this. He also spent approximately 3 hours of the early morning finding reasons to look at his phone and then putting it down again, which was behavior he did not examine directly. At 9 in the morning, Sukjun knocked on the apartment door and came in without waiting, which meant something was moving. Taerim made a call last night, Sukjun said. Not to us. Min-jae set down his coffee. Sungwon. Yes. A silence. Where's Sungwon now? Hanul tracked his phone to a flight. He landed in Nairobi at 6 this morning. The apartment was very quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Nairobi was going about its morning with complete indifference to the fact that something had just shifted. He's not here for me, Min-jae said. No, Sukjun agreed. If Taerim wanted to move against you directly, he would use someone you don't know. Sungwon is someone you know. Sungwon is a message. He's here for leverage. Sukjun said nothing, which was confirmation. Min-jae thought about what leverage meant in this context. He thought about who in Nairobi was now visibly connected to him. The release had included the cafe photograph. The cafe was identifiable to anyone who looked carefully. And the salon was on Gong Road, and anyone who had been tracking his movements, which Taerim certainly had been, knew exactly how many times he had walked through that door. He picked up his phone. He called Sukjun's number from across the room out of habit, and then stopped. He put the phone down. He picked up his jacket. Where are you going? Sukjun said. Gong Road. Min-jae. Find Sungwon, Min-jae said. Don't approach him. Just find him and keep him visible. He was out the door before Sukjun could argue. Zawadi was in the middle of her first client of the morning, a woman named Grace, who came every 2 weeks for a retwist and always brought news. When the door opened and Min-jae walked in with the specific quality of a man who is moving faster than his usual pace and controlling it deliberately. Zawadi looked at him in the mirror. Grace looked at him in the mirror. Grace looked at Zawadi. Zawadi looked back at Min-jae, and something in his face, the particular tightness around his eyes, told her that this was not the continuation of yesterday's conversation. Grace, Zawadi said, can I get you some water? There's a fresh bottle on the shelf and I need just 1 moment. Grace, who was a perceptive woman, said, "Take your time," and picked up her phone with the tact of someone removing themselves from a scene. Zawadi set down her comb and walked to Minjae, stopping close enough to speak quietly. "What happened?" "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said, and his voice was low and even, the operational voice, the one that did not perform anything. "Is there anyone in your life whose daily schedule is predictable? Someone who walks the same route, same time every day?" Zawadi stared at him. "What are you?" "Nalwazi," he said. "Does she walk to campus?" The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Yes," Zawadi said slowly. "She walks from the bus stop on Arguing's Kothek every morning at 8. "Why are you?" She stopped. Something moved through her face. "Minjae, there is someone in Nairobi," he said, "who was sent here to make a point. Not to act. To be visible enough that I understand the point being made." "What is the point?" He looked at her directly. "That I have something to lose now." The salon was completely quiet. Grace had become very interested in her phone. Zawadi held Minjae's gaze for 3 seconds, and then she turned and picked up her own phone and called Nalwazi. It rang 4 times. Zawadi's joy tightened. It rang a 5th time, and then Nalwazi picked up mid-laugh about something, her voice bright and ordinary and completely fine. "Where are you right now?" Zawadi said. "I'm at the campus cafe with Chikandi. Why does your voice sound like that?" "Stay there. Do not walk anywhere alone today. I'll explain later." Zawadi. "Stay with Chikandi. Please." A pause. Nalwazi, who was smart enough to know when her sister was not being dramatic, said, "Okay. I'm staying." Zawadi ended the call and looked at Minjae. The look on her face was not the one he had been afraid of, not the stepping back, not the closing of a door. It was something harder and clearer, the face of a woman who has assessed a situation and decided her position in it. "Tell me everything," she said. "Right now. All of it." He told her. Not the version he would have told 3 weeks ago, carefully edited, strategically incomplete. The full version. Terim. The organization's structure and his place in it. How he had inherited it and why and what it had cost. Duwan and the leverage attempt and why the release had neutralized it but created a different problem. Sungwon and what his presence meant. He told her standing in her own salon with Grace in the background pretending not to hear and the morning light coming through the window plants and the Bluetooth speaker silent on the shelf. Zawadi listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about her that he had understood from the very first argument. She did not perform listening. She actually did it, the complete kind, taking everything in before she responded. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your advisor. Terim. He thinks that because you care about people here now, that makes you controllable." "Yes. And before, when you didn't care about anyone here, you weren't controllable." "That's his position." "So his problem," she said slowly, "is not the music." "Not really. The music is just the symptom. His problem is that you've become a person again." Minjae looked at her. "Someone who feels things," she continued. "Someone who can be threatened through what they love. And he wants you to go back to being the version of yourself that couldn't be touched that way." She paused. "Because that version was useful to him." "Yes," Minjae said quietly. "And what do you want?" The question sat in the room. He said, "I don't want to go back to that version." Zawadi held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to Grace and said, "Sorry for the wait," and picked up her comb and went back to work. Over her shoulder, without turning, she said to Minjae, "Sit down. You look like you haven't slept. I'll make you tea when I'm done with Grace, and then we're going to figure this out." Grace looked up from her phone with an expression of great personal satisfaction and said nothing whatsoever. Minjae sat down. McKenna arrived at 11, as she often did, and read the room in approximately 4 seconds, which was the time it took her to register Minjae sitting in the waiting chair with a cup of tea and the specific expression of a man who has been through something and is being looked after, and Zawadi moving between clients with the focused calm of a woman who has made a decision and is functioning from it. McKenna sat down next to Minjae. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her with the wariness of a man who has heard about this friend and is not entirely sure what is coming. "I've been listening to Dongsing on repeat since 2 in the morning," McKenna said. He said nothing. That song is about your brother. Yes. I'm sorry about your brother, she said, with the directness of someone who means it completely and does not dress it in anything extra. Min-jae looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Thank you, he said, and it came out more genuine than he had intended, which was the thing about McKenna. She made it difficult to be guarded because she herself was so entirely unguarded. I also think, McKenna continued, that you're in serious trouble and you're trying to protect my friend, which I respect. And I think she is going to help you whether you want her to or not, which you should probably also respect. I'm aware of that, he said. Good. She folded her hands in her lap. Then we understand each other. She stayed for 2 hours, which turned out to be useful because she was the one who noticed the man. He was across the street. Medium build, Korean, mid-40s, wearing ordinary clothes that were slightly too well chosen for someone who was supposed to blend into a Nairobi street, the particular nondescriptness of a professional trying to look like nothing. He had been there for 40 minutes in various positions, looking at his phone, looking at the fabric vendor, looking at the salon. McKenna mentioned it to Zawadi quietly while Min-jae was on a call. Zawadi looked once, casually, and then messaged Sukjun's number, which Min-jae had given her that morning. Sukjun replied in under a minute, I see him. Don't change anything you're doing. Zawadi showed McKenna the message. McKenna read it and then went back to her chair and picked up her own phone with the composure of a woman who has decided that if this is the situation, then this is the situation and panic is not on the menu. You're very calm, Min-jae said, returning from his call and finding both women sitting with the specific stillness of people who have just shared information. I own a thrift store in Nairobi, McKenna said. I have negotiated with landlords, suppliers, and 3 separate women who all wanted the same vintage coat on the same day. I can handle this. Despite everything, something moved across Min-jae's face that was almost a real smile. Tendaji arrived at noon. He came on his motorcycle, parked it directly in front of the salon with the confidence of a man who parks wherever he decides, walked in, looked at Min-jae, looked at Zawadi, looked at the man across the street through the window and said, That one's been there since 10. I passed him on my way from the workshop. Min-jae looked at him with a reassessment happening visibly behind his eyes. You noticed him. I notice everything on this road, Tendaji said, pulling up a chair and sitting in it backwards, arms folded across the back. I've been a mechanic here for 8 years. I know every face that doesn't belong. He looked at Min-jae with the full weight of his protective suspicion, which had not disappeared but had reorganized itself into something more specific and less general. I don't like what you come with. I want to be clear about that. I understand, Min-jae said. But you came here alone this morning to warn her. Before you made any other move. Tendaji's jaw worked. I also listened to the album. The whole thing. A pause that cost him something. The song about your brother. My younger brother died when I was 26. Matatu accident. He said it flatly, the way people say the things that are too large for ornamentation. So I understand what that song is. The salon was very quiet. I'm sorry, Min-jae said, and he meant it the same way McKenna had meant it completely, without dressing. Tendaji nodded once. He unfolded from the chair and stood. I'll watch the back of the building, he said, and walked out through the rear door of the salon with the straightforwardness of a man who has decided what he is doing and is doing it. Zawadi watched him go, and her expression was the private fond look of someone who knows that love from certain people always shows up sideways, practical and unannounced, and that is exactly what makes it worth everything. Hanul called Min-jae at 1 in the afternoon. Someone is at a hotel in Westlands, Hanul said. He hasn't moved. He's waiting for you to move first. I know, Min-jae said. What else? Tarim has been in contact with 2 board members of the organization. The ones who are already uncertain about the direction you've been taking. A pause. He's building something. Not fast. Carefully. The way he always does. He wants a vote, Min-jae said. Maybe. Or he wants the threat of one. Which is sometimes more useful. Min-jae thought about this. He was standing outside the salon in the afternoon light, one hand in his pocket, watching the street. The man across the road had gone. Sukjun had moved him along without incident, the quiet, professional way. But his absence was not reassurance. It was punctuation. Hanul, he said. Yes. You told Nalwazi the truth. A beat. Yes. How much? Everything that was mine to tell. Nothing about operational details. Just who I was in relation to you. And why I had been in the forum. How did she respond? Hanul was quiet for a moment. She asked me if I actually liked the music or if I was just monitoring it. And I told her I used to want to be a composer. Another pause, smaller this time. She said she wanted to read everything I'd ever written about music theory, and then she sent me a paper she'd written for her journalism class about the ethics of anonymous artistry and asked me what I thought. Minjae was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't lose that one." "I know," Hanul said, and for the first time in the conversation sounded entirely like a person and not a professional function. The afternoon moved. Clients came and went from the salon. Zawadi worked with the focused ease of someone in their element. And Minjae sat in the waiting area and answered messages and watched the street and drank a second cup of tea that McKenna made without being asked because McKenna had apparently decided she was staying. At 3 in the afternoon, Nalwazi arrived with Chikandi. She walked in with the specific energy of a woman who has been told to stay somewhere safe and has complied completely and is now done complying and has arrived with her laptop bag and a notebook and the expression of someone who has been thinking all day and has things to say about it. She stopped when she saw Minjae. He stood. They looked at each other. Nalwazi Akying, who had spent 6 weeks hunting the identity of Noctis across music forums and waveform analyses and street photographs, looked at the man himself, in her sister's salon, in ordinary afternoon light, and her expression moved through several things in quick succession: recognition, the vindication of confirmed research, something more complicated, and then something that settled into a directness very similar to her sister's. "I have questions," she said. "I know," he said. "Not right now," she said. "Right now I have something else." She opened her laptop bag and pulled out a printed document, her article, the one she had been writing since morning. "I want you to read this before it goes anywhere. I want you to know what I've written." She held it out. "Because I think the story I found is not the story I started looking for, and I want to tell the right one." He took it. He read it standing there for pages while the salon moved around him. When he finished, he looked up at her. "You could have gone further," he said. "With the organization. With Terim. You have enough." "I know," she said. "But that's not the story that matters. The story that matters is the music and why it was buried and what it cost to bury it and what it meant when it came back." She looked at him steadily. "I'm a journalist, not a weapon. I don't want to destroy you. I want to tell something true." Chikandi, standing beside her, said nothing. He had his camera bag on his shoulder. He had been watching Minjae read with the alert, observant eyes of a man whose job is to see things. When Minjae looked at him, Chikandi said, "I have photographs I haven't published. I won't publish them without your knowledge. But I'd like to talk to you about one project when this is over." "What project?" Minjae said. "A photo essay," Chikandi said. "About what music looks like when it's being hidden. And what it looks like when it isn't." He paused. "The difference on a person's face is extraordinary. I've been watching it for weeks without knowing what I was watching." Minjae looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "When this is over." "When this is over," Chikandi agreed. What none of them knew was that the conversation that would actually end it had already begun. Jitaek, in Seoul, had done something without telling Minjae, because Jitaek was 61 years old and had been doing this long enough to know when to ask permission and when to simply act and present the results. He had contacted Im Saeon was the entertainment reporter who had been hunting Noctis's identity for months, the relentless one, the kind of journalist who did not stop because stopping was not a personality type she possessed. Jitaek had called her and said, "I will give you the full story, the real one, unfiltered, first access, on one condition." Saeon had said, "What condition?" "You call Terim," Jitaek said. "You tell him you have the story. Everything. And you ask him for comment." Saeon had understood immediately because she was very good at her job. If Saeon called Terim for comment, it meant the story was already written and already placed and nothing Terim could do organizationally would stop it. The leverage he was building, the votes, the board members, the carefully constructed threat of institutional pressure against Min-jae became worthless the moment the full story was public on Saeon's terms, which were the most widely read terms available. Saeon called Taerim at 4 p.m. Seoul time. Taerim's response to the call, according to Hanul, who had been monitoring his communications, was to sit in his chair for approximately 30 minutes. Then he called Sungwon and told him to come home. Min-jae received the message from Hanul at 5 p.m. Nairobi time. Sungwon is booked on a 9 p.m. flight. Taerim has gone quiet. Saeon's piece publishes tomorrow morning. It's comprehensive. Ji-taek gave her everything, including session recordings and his own testimony. Taerim has no move left that doesn't make him the story. Min-jae read the message twice. Then he looked up at the salon, at the warm light in the window, at the ordinary, beautiful fact of the place. He went inside. Zawadi was finishing her last client of the day, a young woman who was watching the whole room with the bright-eyed attention of someone who had correctly identified that something significant was happening around her and was making the most of being present for it. When the client left, the salon was empty, and the afternoon had turned to the golden edge of evening, and it was just the two of them and the light. Zawadi swept up. Min-jae stood at the window watching the street, which was now just a street, fabric vendors packing up, the last of the afternoon foot traffic, the ordinary machinery of a Nairobi evening assembling itself. "It's over," she said, not looking up from the sweeping. "The immediate thing." "Yes, but not the organization." "No," he said. "Not the organization. That doesn't resolve in an afternoon." She nodded slowly. She finished sweeping and leaned the broom against the wall and looked at him across the salon. "What does resolving it actually look like? Is that something that's possible?" He had thought about this for a long time. He had thought about it since before Nairobi, in the abstract, the way you think about things you can see the shape of but cannot yet touch. He thought about Minsu, about what Minsu would have said, about the edge of the bed, and try again until the line was right. "There are parts of it that can be legitimate," he said. "The shipping, the real estate, the structural parts. That's been my direction for 2 years. Taerim's resistance is partly about money and partly about the kind of man he is. But there are others in the organization who understand what I'm trying to do." He paused. "It won't be fast. And I won't lie to you about what it looks like in the middle of the process." "I'm not asking you to lie," she said. "I know. I'm asking you if you're actually moving towards something or if you're just managing something." He looked at her. "Moving towards something," he said. "I need you to believe that." "I do," she said, simply, the way she said things she meant, without decoration, without softening. "That doesn't mean I don't have conditions. Tell me the conditions." She leaned against her station, arms loose at her sides. "Honesty. Not just when it's operationally necessary. Actual honesty, the kind you gave me this morning, all the time." She held up one finger. "My sister stays safe. Whatever that requires." Second finger. "You finish the album. Properly. With Ji-taek. Not halfway and not hiding." Third finger. "And when Tendaji eventually comes around completely, which he will, because he already mostly has and he just needs time to admit it, you treat that with respect. He loves this family, and he shows it badly, and that matters." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Those are reasonable conditions." "They're not negotiable," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why they're reasonable." Something moved in her face, the involuntary thing, the almost smile she had been letting through more often in the last 24 hours, the one that changed her whole face. He crossed the salon. He stopped in front of her, close, the distance that had been closing for weeks now at something very near zero, and he looked at her in the direct, undefended way he had learned from her without realizing he was learning it. "I wrote a song this morning," he said. "Before everything happened. At Amani's. On a napkin." "About what?" she said. "About laughing," he said. "About hearing someone laugh and recognizing it as the sound of something you didn't know you'd been looking for." She looked at him. The golden evening light was all over everything, the plants, the photographs on the wall, the two of them standing in the middle of the salon. "That's a good subject," she said quietly. "I thought so," he said. Outside, Nairobi settled into its evening. Across the street, if you looked, there was no one watching the salon. Tendaji's motorcycle was parked at the back, and he was probably still there, doing what Tendaji did, which was love people through proximity and practicality, and never saying it outright. McKenna had gone back to her thrift store 2 hours ago, but had texted Zawadi 4 times since, which was McKenna's version of the same thing. Nalwazi was at the campus cafe with Chikandi, her article saved and ready, the right story waiting to be told in the morning. Hanul was in a room somewhere with a keyboard instrument and a conversation that had gone longer than expected and a feeling they had not planned for. Sukjun was outside somewhere, doing what Sukjun did, which was make sure the space was safe and then disappear into the background of it. And at Amani's cafe, the back corner table was clean and waiting, a ceramic cup already set up for morning, because Amani had seen enough to know that the man would be back. And that when he came back, he would be writing something different from what he had been writing before, not a song trying to make sense of a wound, but a song that had found something on the other side of one. In the salon, in the golden last light of the evening, Kang Minjae reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded napkin on Zawadi's station. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Korean," he said. "I'll translate it for you." She picked it up, unfolded it carefully, looked at the handwriting she couldn't read. Then she looked up at him and said, "Translate it now." He did. And whatever he said, in the warm quiet of the salon with the evening settling over Nairobi and the music not playing for once, because it didn't need to, was enough. It was more than enough. It was the truest thing he had said since he learned how to say true things again, which had happened in this room, in this light, in the company of a woman who had loved the best part of him before she knew his name, and had not loved it any less once she did. The song he buried had found its way home. Not to silence. Not to hiding. But to the one place all honest music eventually goes, if it is patient enough, if the person who made it is brave enough. To being heard. Fully. Finally. By the right person. In the right room. At exactly the right time. If this story found you and held you all the way to the end, then you are exactly the person it was made for. Like this video so more people can find it. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. There are more coming and they will hit just as hard. And drop a comment telling me which moment broke you open the most, because I read every single one. Thank you for being here until the very last word. That means everything.